In August 1939, a physicist sat in a desk in a rented cottage on Long Island and wrote a letter. 2 pages, no budget, no technical blueprint, no multi-year roadmap, just a few hundred carefully chosen words. By the time the consequences of that letter finished unfolding, the United States had spent $2.2 billion, employed 130,000 people, and built a weapon that ended one war while starting an entirely new kind of fear. This is the story of how 2 pages moved 2 billion. I used to assume history turned on speeches, on grand moments of oratory and bold declarations. Then you start noticing how often it actually turns on paperwork. A war starts because of a telegram. A company pivots because of a memo. A scientific field reorganizes itself because of a research paper. The big machinery only moves after someone produces a small artifact that makes movement permissible. And if you want a perfect case study of how that works, of how power actually moves through writing, Einstein's letter to Roosevelt is it. Because hidden inside this document are principles about persuasion, legitimacy, and what I like to call category creation that apply beyond nuclear physics and beyond 1939. Let's start with the document itself. The original letter sits in the FDR Presidential Library Archives, dated August 2nd, 1939. Written from Old Grove Road in Long Island, you can read every word online. And what strikes me when I sit with this letter isn't the physics, it's the structure. The letter opens with a move that's easy to miss. Einstein immediately attributes the underlying work to others. Quote, "Some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Szilard," he writes, "has led him to a conclusion. A chain reaction in uranium may soon be possible." Now, Enrico Fermi was already famous among physicists, but Leo Szilard, the other name there, was less famous to the public. Szilard was a Hungarian-born physicist who had been thinking about nuclear chain reactions for years. He had the political urgency of an immigrant watching Europe once again slide towards catastrophe in real time. Einstein was the amplifier. Szilard was the engine. That distinction matters enormously for what comes after. Then comes something else that's easy to miss if you're reading quickly. The letter mixes scientific possibility with operational guidance in the same breath. Einstein tells Roosevelt that a nuclear chain reaction in uranium may be possible, quote, "in the immediate future," and that this would lead to power generation and, quote, "the construction of bombs." But he's careful about uncertainty. He notes that it is conceivable that extremely powerful bombs of a new type could be built, but also that such bombs might be too heavy for delivery by air. That last detail is one of my favorites in this entire story. In the same paragraph where Einstein helps usher in the nuclear age, he still imagines the bomb as something, quote, "carried by boat and exploded in a port." The future arrives wrapped in the constraints of the present. Then, on the second page, the letter pivots into something surprising: supply chains. The US has only very poor ores of uranium in moderate quantities, Einstein writes, and he points specifically to Canada, Czechoslovakia, and the Belgian Congo, as it was at the time, as important sources. This is one of the tells that the letter was written by people who were thinking concretely. It goes beyond science might do X to specify exactly where the operation would choke if X turned out to be real. That specificity is carrying a lot of weight because it signals to the reader, we haven't just been theorizing, we've been planning. Now, if you want to understand the letter's real force, you have to understand something uncomfortable. It was not inevitable that Einstein would be the signer. The FDR Presidential Library has a short post about this letter, and it includes a very blunt sentence. I'll read it directly. Because Einstein had a prior relationship with the Roosevelts and was internationally well known, a letter was drafted for his signature. That is blunt, almost to the point of being clinical. Einstein would get read. That was the entire plan. And this reveals something that smart technical people tend to learn late in their careers. In large systems, the constraint is often not truth, it is routing. You can have the right idea and still fail completely if you cannot get the idea to the person who can authorize motion in a form that survives the trip. I think about Barry Marshall here. Marshall was an Australian doctor who, in the 1980s, could not convince the medical establishment that stomach ulcers were caused by bacteria rather than stress. He had the evidence. He published peer-reviewed papers. Nothing moved. The field had seen the data, but ordinary proof simply could not reorganize an economy of attention and belief that had calcified around stress as the accepted cause. So Marshall did something very dramatic. He drank a petri dish full of bacteria, gave himself gastritis, and then cured it with antibiotics. He manufactured a moment that forced recategorization. Einstein's letter solved a similar problem through different means. His name functioned as a credibility escrow account, legitimacy stored up over decades of fame and scientific achievement, and it could be spent in a single transaction to buy attention from the highest level of government. That concept, credibility as a routing mechanism, is worth pausing on. The idea itself doesn't change. The physics doesn't change. What changes is whether the right person reads it and feels permission to act. Einstein's signature was the permission slip. And there's another routing detail that usually gets smoothed over in the telling. The letter was not immediately delivered. The National Archives notes that Alexander Sachs, a Wall Street economist and Roosevelt advisor, personally hand-delivered it on October 11, 1939, more than 2 months after it was written. The outbreak of World War II in September had delayed the initial attempt. Einstein and Szilard didn't just write to the White House. They found a specific person who could physically walk the letter into the room. And according to the Department of Energy's own history of the Manhattan Project, Sachs met with Roosevelt, initially struggled to persuade him, then succeeded at a second meeting over breakfast. The Roosevelt Library's account adds the most quoted line from this whole episode. After learning the contents, Roosevelt turned to his military advisor, General Edwin Watson, and said 3 words: "This requires action." That phrase is the hinge. That's the exact moment Einstein's possibility becomes FDR's administrative obligation. Why did those 3 words matter so much? Because until Roosevelt said them, the atomic bomb did not exist as a category of legitimate government concern. This is the part that took me the longest to understand, and I think it's the most important part of this entire story. The problem with nuclear weapons in 1939 was not that nobody understood fission. Physicists had been publishing about chain reactions. The knowledge was circulating. The problem was that no government had installed atomic bomb as a real category of risk inside its administrative imagination. Now, framing is one of those concepts that gets thrown around a lot, but it matters deeply here. So let me be precise about what I mean. Framing is the act of defining how a situation should be categorized, what it should be compared to, and therefore what kind of response is appropriate. Framing determines whether a problem gets filed under interesting but speculative or urgent national security threat. Same facts, completely different outcomes depending on the frame. And Einstein's letter created a frame. Before the category atomic bomb existed inside the government, pursuing nuclear weapons looked paranoid. After the category existed, pursuing them looked responsible. Same underlying physics, completely different political reality. Once atomic bomb existed as a legitimate object inside the administrative system, it could be staffed, funded, argued about, escalated. The letter didn't contain the Manhattan Project. It contained the seed of a decision tree. It created an official pathway for nuclear work, which then intersected with other inputs. British research conclusion, wartime pressures, organizational restructuring, each one increasing the scope. And the first action was almost comically modest. The Uranium Committee met on October 21st, 1939, recommended acquiring graphite and uranium oxide, and in February 1940, allocated $6,000 to support chain reaction research at Columbia University. $6,000. That's a rounding error in federal budgets, even in 1940 dollars. But it's also exactly what early stage commitment looks like when a system is still deciding whether a new reality is real. You don't get the blank check. You get the pilot, the seed round in modern terms. But that pilot existed because the category now existed. And categories compound. In June 1940, the Uranium Committee was absorbed into the National Defense Research Committee, created at the urging at Vannevar Bush, an engineer and science administrator who reorganized how the federal government funded and directed wartime research. In July 1941, Bush received the British Maud Committee report, estimating a critical mass of uranium-235 at around 10 kilograms, enough for an enormous explosion, buildable in approximately 2 years. That report turned a slow-burning pilot into an accelerating program. By August 1942, the Manhattan Engineer District was officially created. At its peak, 130,000 workers, $2.2 billion spent, over $30 billion in today's dollars. The letter didn't cause all of that directly, but it made all of that administratively possible. So what was the letter functionally? The more I sit with it, the more I think the answer is a control surface, a small artifact that in environments where resources are concentrated, reaches into the future and rearranges what becomes possible. And the memos that move resources are rarely the memos that ask for everything. They're the memos that make the first step unavoidable and trust that the rest will compound. Look at the letter's actual ask. Einstein doesn't request a weapons program. He requests a person. Someone Roosevelt trusts who can carry the problem across the internal borders of a large system, coordinating across departments, securing supply, speeding experiments. That's it. One channel. And that modesty is precisely what made the ask actionable. A president can appoint a coordinator over breakfast. He cannot launch a multi-billion-dollar weapons program over breakfast. The letter was sized to the decision it needed to produce. But the letter also did something subtler with the information about Germany stopping uranium sales from Czechoslovakia and attaching physicists to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. It turned a scientific possibility into a geopolitical race. It offered Roosevelt a frame where action was prudence and inaction was the real gamble. And then there's the detail that haunts this whole story. Einstein became a US citizen in 1940, but the Army denied him a security clearance. He was never part of the Manhattan Project, never set foot in Los Alamos. The system used his legitimacy to justify action, then kept him far from the execution. Once you set a system in motion, the system becomes its own actor. You can start the chain, but you cannot steer every link. And that might be the real lesson of the letter. Not just how to move a system, but what it costs to be the one who moves it. Narrative power is the ability to make a certain course of action feel inevitable, or at least defensible, under uncertainty. It is the ability to install categories that redirect budgets, careers, and national priorities. And it operates through small artifacts that cross borders and make movement possible. Einstein's letter is short. It is concrete. It is written in the receiver's language. It comes with preloaded legitimacy, and it asks for one thing. It grounds the physics in supply chains and bottlenecks, and it creates a category where none existed before. That combination is rare. When it happens, 2 pages can make $2 billion feel like the responsible next step. I keep thinking about which decisions are sitting in the looks paranoid bucket right now that will, 5 years from now, sit in the obviously necessary bucket. And somewhere, right now, someone is writing the 2-page document that will make the difference. If you found this interesting, subscribe to my free newsletter, link in the description. If you're new here, I make videos about how power, persuasion, and influence actually work, using real historical case studies. If that's something that you want to think about more carefully, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.